It's an extraordinary attendance today. I think if we had been able to book the Sydney Cricket Ground, Anthony, I think we probably could have filled that as well. But thank you, everybody. We've managed to get a huge attendance today, and I think obviously we have some very distinguished guests with us today who we are delighted to host, and we'll do some proper introductions in a moment. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We acknowledge and pay our respects to their traditional custodianship and continuing association with these lands. And we also extend a very warm welcome to any First Nations Australians who are with us today. Welcome indeed. Just a few words that I want to say about the top priorities for business at this point in time. We seek to use this opportunity during the federal election campaign to advance an agenda that ties in directly with the most pressing priorities for business in the next 3 years, but also which links to our longer term visions for the Australian economy. To that end, I would emphasise 5 key points, 5 key priorities that business sees that need to be at the top of the list on the agenda for the next federal government. The need to invest in skills, the value of encouraging stronger labour force participation to help address the critical labour shortages that we face at this time, a smart agenda to reduce the compliance burden on small and local businesses and to ease cash flow pressures that they are facing. We need an ambitious agenda for economic reform to drive productivity and revitalise business investment and innovation. And finally, we need an agenda to build sustainability and resilience in our economy and across industry. ACCI is proud to advance the agenda for business with Business New South Wales and with the other state and territory chambers of commerce that are our members, as well as our industry association members. Now it gives me great pleasure to invite Nola Watson, the President of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to welcome our distinguished guests today. And Nola will also then be followed by Lyle Gorman, the President of Business New South Wales. Nola, over to you, please.
Well, good afternoon. The Honourable Anthony Albanese, distinguished guests and members and supporters of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We talk within the Chamber movement that our objective, our vision for ACCI is to make Australia the best place in the world to do business. It's a pretty simple agenda and a pretty simple ambition, a simple ambition that needs a challenging agenda underneath it. But we do this not out of some sort of sense of dogma, but rather because we firmly believe that a vibrant business community really does underpin kind of prosperity and a harmonious and fair society, particularly if we have a vibrant small and medium sector businesses within the community. The ACCI, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, yes, it is an organisation with CEO in Canberra and some really skilled and talented staff, but in some ways it's essentially a movement too. It's a movement of business and it's an enormous network. All of the businesses within all of the chambers of commerce across all of the states in Australia reaches down into many of the local chambers of commerce and indeed the 80 industry associations and the businesses that they represent. So it's a powerful movement, it's a powerful network, and one that we take very seriously at the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry in representing all of those businesses. I'm very pleased today that we are co-hosting this with Business New South Wales. I can also see businesses and leaders from Business Sydney and Business Western Sydney. So it shows once again how the network works in actual operation. You've seen the video there leading up to the campaign regarding Back Australian Business. The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry launched this in April, early April, this campaign leading up to the election, but it wasn't just sort of dreamt up then. It was really based on quite a lot of work around a policy and framework document setting out a vision for a better Australia, which was launched in November last year. That broader framework, that pathway forward for a better Australia doesn't end when the election happens. It's very much something that we as an organisation want to prosecute over the next few years. So as part of our campaign, however, we have been engaging with political leaders around the country. We're delighted that we've been able to bring together political leaders for our members to not just hear from, but also have some time for questioning and getting discussions going in forums such as this. Obviously, it's hugely popular. It's a full house here. So I came in today and thought, wow, after all those years of COVID, it seems like a lot of people in the room. But we're very pleased to see everybody here, and I'm sure we'll have some lively discussion. So with that, I'll just hand over to do the official introductions to our guest, to Lyle Gorman, my friend and colleague, as President of Business New South Wales.
Thank you very much, Noel, and wonderful to be here, and what a wonderful eclectic group of folk in this room today, and how good to be face to face. Although Anthony just said no social distancing here, and I guess he can reflect on that like a lot of us can on the back of COVID recently. I was talking to my 20-year-old and 18-year-old kids at dinner last night. I've been trying to build, this is the first time they've ever been able to vote in a federal election. So I've been trying to work up to this for about 4 months and educate. And then I said, well, what I'm doing here today, and I said, I'm introducing Anthony, and they said, how come you can get that close to a politician in Australia, Dad? And I said, well, we can, because that's the nature of who they are. They are givers, they are close to the community, and they reflect back what community needs and stands for. So when I look around the room today and I see Anthony here and Jim and Tanya, I think my good mate Jason Clare's not too far away, and Chris Bowen and so on, I can actually go back to it and say that's how close you can actually get to politicians in our world, and that's how blessed we are that we can, because they do listen, they do want to hear, and they do want to respond and react. Andrew, a bit different to your 5 points of COVID. My kids started to spit out a few for me. I said, yeah, what's really important in this election? And we've been, as I said, trying to build up for that for a little while. And it's their list, not mine, so I'm just going to spit it out. But the first one was about how do we stop the rain and the mould in our house? I thought, well, God, I've come a long way as a dad. But of course, that's all about climate, as you well know, absolutely. And my son Liam, he's 20, God bless him, he's in year 3 at Western Sydney University, and I think I saw a couple of reps from there here earlier. He said, how come my Wi-Fi so slow, Dad? And I said, well, there we go. You know, and of course, you know what I'm talking about, the technology and so on, and what's happening here around innovation and those sorts of things. And they started to give me a whole lot of feedback. How can I get a job, Dad? I said, good question. Seems to be plenty of unemployment out there at the moment, but also plenty of opportunity, so they've started to walk the streets. And my daughter, in fact, out of the blue, got offered law, paramedicine and psychology, and took a job at McGrath's Real Estate at St Ives. And I thought, I've done really well here as a dad. But you know what she really did, and this is what I think is really important, a message for the political leaders of today. She came back and she said, they've offered me a cadetship for 12 months and then they may or may not keep me. It depends on whether I get my licence or not. And if an agent asks me, they want to pay me $25,000. I said, that sounds awesome. She said, it's not enough money, Dad. I said, well, go back and negotiate. So she went back and negotiated and then came home the next day. This is a true story, and spoke to them. And she came back with a full-time job, $35,000 a year. So I think there's a message in that from our young people and where they're heading today, and the expectations they want to place on our community, our business, and our political leaders at large. So lots of lenses from the kids last night over dinner, which was also really great. They mentioned TAFE. What can we go and do at TAFE that fast tracks what we want to do in terms of employment? Liam's in year 3.5 of a university degree. He said, how could I have got there quicker and what could I do? And I said, good question, mate, good question. So I'll mention that tomorrow to Anthony. So I did. And of course, they mentioned the cost of living, because Lauren, who started at McGrath's and goes to St Ives Village, is paying $7 for a cup of coffee. And she wasn't very impressed with that either, on $35,000 a year. And they went on and on, Anthony. But I think that the message I wanted to make was, and they talked about me, because I've got a mortgage like most of us, and they spoke about interest rates, and they saw me the other day and said, here we go again, kids, we have to work a little bit harder, and so on. But if I went down there, and the other one that's really important to me, and I know David Borges here is on the board of Evolve Housing, was about the cost of housing. I think that was something that was really relevant to them because they just saw our own family sell and buy in the market in the last 3 months. So they really understood the affordability nature of housing and so on. But look, all of that being said, I think there's some incredible lenses from our young people there as well. But to be so close to the political leaders in our world, no matter what side of politics they sit on, I think for us all in this room is an absolute blessing. And it's with great pleasure and privilege, Anthony, I invite you to the stage. This is a business-led recovery in the minds of many, and Jim, I know we've spoken about that on quite a few occasions. It'd be great to see how you see business working with the political leaders of the future, no matter which party's in office, to really help business link arms with you guys. And I know it's a key mantra of yours, Jim, but how do we really link arms as a business community and come together on the back of a remarkable 3 or 4 years with all the various challenges we lived through from an environmental perspective and, of course, a pandemic perspective. So with great pleasure, I invite Anthony to come to the stage and share with you a presentation.
Well, thanks very much, Lyle, and thanks, Nola, as well, for your generous introductions. And thanks, Andrew, as well. When we speak about relationships with business, Andrew was the CEO of another organisation when I became the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport way back in 2007. And we worked together on microeconomic reform, including taking national transport regulators from 23 down to 3. Not sexy, just $30 billion benefit to the national economy over 20 years. That's what you can do when you get business working together with government to drive macroeconomic reform. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and on behalf of the Australian Labor Party, recommit again to the implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. We will be a more inclusive country, a more respectful country when we acknowledge the fact that our history did not begin in 1788, and when we recognise First Nations people in our Constitution with a voice to Parliament. Can I acknowledge my colleagues who are here? Jim Chalmers, Jason Clare, Tanya Plibersek, Chris Bowen, Mark Butler, Stephen Jones, Tony Burke, Katie Gallagher, and a particular thank you for giving me the honour, Paul Keating, responsible for 30 years of consecutive economic growth. Australia's need for economic reform is as clear as it is urgent. I stand here today seeking the honour and the privilege of serving as Prime Minister of this great nation, because I know Australia needs a Labor government, because it is only Labor that does the big reforms. And at this moment in our history, it is imperative that we deliver the next set of national productivity reforms to secure our future for the coming decades. Under this government, Australia has seen a decade of inertia and policy division. They have had no agenda for reform, no appetite for setting Australia up for the challenges we know are coming, let alone the ones that we face right now. Instead, what we have seen is a doubling of debt before the pandemic even reached our shores. Productivity going backwards, wages which were stagnant, business investment dropping 20% since the coalition came to office. Australia now ranks last in the OECD in manufacturing output. In the Harvard Index of Global Economic Complexity, Australia ranks 86th, sandwiched between Paraguay and Uzbekistan. And all of this before the recent news of the highest inflation rates in 2 decades and an interest rate hike that sent jitters through Australia's cities, suburbs and regions. Now, all of this adds up to an economy where it is simply too hard for too many Australians to get ahead. Australians who work hard, take responsibility and do the right thing should get rewards for their work, but they know that the cost of everything is going up, but their pay isn't. They wonder how they're going to achieve that better life that they dream about. This is an economy that's crying out for reform, real, meaningful reform. And if Labor is elected, this is the economy we will inherit, along with $1 trillion of debt and just not enough to show for it. We are ready with real plans that will make a real difference to the lives of everyday Australians and to the ongoing prosperity of our great country. Because Labor governments have always changed Australia for the better. Labor governments have always been determined to create a better life for people, like the people I grew up with, just down the road here on Pyrmont Bridge Road, Camperdown. A better future for the Australians that I meet all around the country. Australians who recognise that our economic challenges are not some distant idea. They are here now. Cost of living, climate change, falling wages, unaffordable housing, economic security. These crises are here now. And we can't afford to waste another 3 years. We can't afford 3 more years of a government that, when confronted with these challenges, responds with the declaration, "It's not my job." As a young man, I witnessed the Hawke-Keating reforms. I contributed to the Rudd-Gillard reforms as a minister. I have learned and I have grown over the years. And I've seen firsthand how the actions of these forward-thinking governments laid the foundations for economic growth and success for decades. Bob Hawke and Paul Keating showed Australia how the practical application of a Labor economic agenda reaps dividends for people. Their Labor government provided a blueprint for the doctrine that has been central to Labor's modern agenda, that economic growth underwrites social opportunity. Hawke and Keating invented the Labor model for inclusive growth, based on convictions that were new and bracing for the Labor Party at the time. The conviction in private wealth and private reward, but combined with a devotion to the social wage and public progress. This was a new model. It was not the Reagan-Thatcher model of neoliberalism that would take growth for a part without inclusion of the whole. It was not the free market model of private wealth and public squalor. It was a uniquely Australian model of economic reform, combined with a social dividend for the public good. Hawke-Keating built an Australian economy which delivered. For the first time, a completely open, competitive international economy with a full external orientation. For the first time, completely open domestic financial markets. For the first time, productivity driving enterprise bargaining that delivered real wage growth. A national superannuation scheme which remedied this country's 2 centuries of capital paucity while transforming retirement incomes. A tax system which dramatically cut personal rates of taxation while removing the double taxation of equity and dividends. And importantly, a floating exchange rate which has acted efficiently as the nation's income shock absorber since 1993, relentlessly protecting national competitiveness. This is modern Labor's proud record, and we have the architect with us here today. A transformation that underwrote 30 years of uninterrupted economic growth that Australia experienced from 1991. Now, the Liberals shamelessly banked Labor's structural reforms, nearly a decade and a half of tireless work, while devoting the last decade to simply spending the dividends of those economic improvements. Yet they have the gall to disparage Labor's policy innovation and our reform courage. The Rudd and Gillard governments, which I was proud to serve as a minister in portfolios including infrastructure, transport, communications, regional development, local government. We kept the Labor reform agenda as a core task while we were dealing with the global financial crisis. Now, today in Sydney, it's easy to forget the shockwaves that the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008 sent around the globe. The cascading effects upended some of the world's largest and most robust economies. Working people in many advanced economies paid a really heavy price. But under the Rudd and Gillard government stewardship, Australia led the world. Australia was one of the only advanced economies which continued to grow as the global economy shrunk. And in pursuing this growth, we also left a lasting legacy. The National Broadband Network to enable Australian business to compete and drive the 21st century digital economy. The National Disability Insurance Scheme to allow for the full participation of all of our citizens in our economy and our society. The creation of Infrastructure Australia to ensure that capital investment was directed to the highest productivity boosting projects. Ratifying the Kyoto Protocol and promoting action on climate change through the renewable energy target. Creating the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. The creation of the Major Cities Unit to re-engage with urban policy, and funding, something I'm particularly proud of, more funding for urban public transport projects in the 6 years from 2007 than occurred in the previous 107 years from Federation right through to 2007. Paid parental leave to improve living standards and enhance productivity and workforce participation, and moving to needs-based schools funding. Now, these achievements exemplified socially inclusive growth, the kind of growth that is only possible with economic reform that lifts productivity. Every Labor Prime Minister in my political lifetime has created a significant socially inclusive legacy. For Hawke, universal healthcare through Medicare. For Paul, universal superannuation through compulsory employer contributions. For Rudd, the NBN with all its productivity enhancing potential. For Gillard, the NDIS with all its world-class provisioning for the needs of all Australians with disabilities. All of these policies contributed to the nation's productivity because a people who can avail themselves of universal healthcare are a productive people. Because of people who can look forward to retirement savings that will enable them to retire with leisure and amenity are a productive people. Because of people who have the public infrastructure to connect in the digital age are a productive people. Because of people who know their loved ones who are disabled have the best care that our society can provide are a productive people. Now, the Liberal and Nationals opposed 3 of these universal policies, and only after more than 2 decades of opposition did the Liberal Party reluctantly relent on their open opposition to Medicare. But they continue to make cuts, and they've foreshadowed the appointment of a health minister who believes that Medicare is, to quote her, not sustainable. Any chance they get to take the universal out of universal healthcare, they will seize. At every opportunity, the Liberals have delayed or resisted increases in the superannuation guarantee, and they are obsessive in their undermining of industry superannuation funds, even though they have consistently produced outstanding returns and, importantly, they provide a source of capital which is absolutely the envy of the world. They trash the NBN by replacing the fibre model with a hybrid mess based upon last century's copper technology. So the access to high-speed broadband was income-based, reinforcing social inequality, rather than what the NBN was aimed at is enhancing opportunity. And they blew out the cost by $29 billion from their own assessments in the process, by the way. And we know their mismanagement of the NDIS is having dire consequences. Thousands of Australians have had their cuts to their NDIS plans, which make no sense and are undermining the very foundations of the system. So the record is clear. Labor enlarges, the Liberals diminish. These conditions have shaped the reform agenda that Labor is taking to the next election. The fact is that the country has been drawing down on the sources of Labor's productivity-enhancing economic growth policies for some 3 decades now. We now need new reforms to drive growth in the decades ahead. The sources of economic growth need to be replenished. A country cannot keep drawing from an old well because the well eventually dries out. Economic policies that play around the edges don't position the country for the long term. Australia needs a new playbook to seize the future. My Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, and my Shadow Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, have already put forward Labor's economic statement. It's a comprehensive, responsible plan for growth. A better economy, a better budget, a better future. A growth strategy built on the recognition that as we emerge from the pandemic, Australia is unprepared for the triple whammy of rising inflation, falling real wages, and interest rate rises, as we saw just this week. The RBA Governor has made it clear that we should be bracing for further and likely more significant rate rises in the coming year. Now, this means that Australia needs investments that ease the cost of living for families, that help more Australians into work and into higher paid jobs, and grow the economy without adding to inflation. Today, I want to talk more about several elements of our plan that accomplish those goals. Important and urgently needed economic reforms. Reforms in the Labor tradition of inclusive growth. Boosting wages through productivity. Investing in skills training and revitalising domestic manufacturing. Promoting women's economic opportunity. Universal childcare. Climate change action that creates jobs, attracts investment, reduces costs for existing businesses, and boosts new and emerging industries. I firmly believe the social dividends of growth need to extend to childcare and aged care and those seeking work or more secure work. We will make secure jobs with good wages our focus. Australia must lift the country's productivity. For, as the economist Paul Krugman once famously said, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything. The Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison governments of the past decade have just dropped the ball on productivity. And as I've said before, nothing smacks of diminishing returns more than the phrase Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison government. Infrastructure investment under this government has based upon colour-coded spreadsheets rather than productivity. They have a deliberate suppression of wages, an over-reliance on temporary labour rather than skilling up Australians. They have no energy policy. It all adds up to flatlining productivity. Worse outcomes for business and workers alike, which is why I was so keen to have today's key address done with the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I want to state very clearly, I want to lead a government that works with business, that works with unions, that brings the country together to drive these reforms through. A Labor government will lift productivity and will close the gap on wages and productivity. We must return wages to the gain-sharing model, when a growing economy underpinned a first world wages model, when the larger national income pie grew for the benefit of both workers and business. It was Labor that brought business and unions together to pursue their common interests and grow national income. It was Labor that broke inflation and guaranteed improvements in the social wage, thereby securing social inclusion as a necessary component of an economic growth agenda. The economic reforms I'm taking to this election will grow the national income and lift productivity. Real wages have continued to decline over the last year. The budget papers forecast a mere 0.5 percentage point of growth each year over the next 6 years. And the shocking fact is that wage growth forecasts under this government have been wrong on 52 out of 55 occasions. This is why cost of living is so central and so pressing in this election. A Labor government that I lead will reinvigorate Australia's enterprise bargaining system to promote productivity. We must rediscover the spirit of consensus that Bob Hawke and Paul Keating used to bring together governments, trade unions, businesses and civil society around their shared aims of growth and job creation. Bring business and unions together at the enterprise bargaining table with productivity gains as a focal point is the only way that you can increase both profits and wages without inflationary pressure. Our ambition of a new consensus will extend to small businesses and the people who work in them too. Labor is uniquely placed to back in work already underway between the ACCU and COSBOA, which will make workplace relations for small businesses simpler and more accessible, while also ensuring fairness. If I'm successful at this election, one of my first acts will be to convene an employment summit to bring employers and unions together, including ACCI obviously, to collaborate on secure work and to ensure enterprise bargaining works effectively. We will commission a white paper on the labour market to set out a plan for how we will promote secure work and higher wages. Now, this contrasts with the announcement that a re-elected Morrison government will return to its discredited workplace legislation, which had at its core the suspension of the Better Off Overall test. Now, when the Liberals goaded the car industry offshore, Australia lost our most high-tech, complex manufacturing industry. Since then, this government has overseen a continued loss of industrial and manufacturing capability. A key part of our national productivity challenge is the need for Australian industry to climb up the technological ladder. We need to make things here again, and we need to make high-value, high-tech products. Australia produces science at a level commensurate with the size of our economy. But under Scott Morrison's government, we commercialise that science as poorly as any country in the OECD. Chris and I were just up at the Smart Energy Expo earlier today. Great Australian invention and science, but we're not taking advantage of it. One of the great microeconomic opportunities ahead of us is turning Australian-led science into Australian jobs. A government I lead will do exactly this. The National Reconstruction Fund is a transformative commitment that will ensure finances available for new investments in new high-tech industries. We will back the tech sector and have already announced our goal of 1.2 million tech-related jobs by 2030. We will recognise the value of young innovators and will encourage these entrepreneurs. Younger firms are the ultimate problem solvers, pairing fresh eyes with technology to do things differently and improve the operations of established firms. We recognise that skills and workforce shortages are currently plaguing businesses across the country, putting a handbrake on some companies' ambitions for growth and contributing to rising prices for others. We will ensure that Australians are trained for the jobs of today and of tomorrow through our investment in 465,000 fee-free TAFE places and 20,000 additional university places in areas of skills shortage, and the creation of Jobs and Skills Australia to do for labour what Infrastructure Australia does for capital, to have a body at arm's length from the government, including private sector representatives, to make sure that we get rid of the partisan nonsense from this debate. Jobs and Skills Australia will ensure the government policy across skills, training and education is directed to developing the workforce that we need for the modern country that we seek to be. A government I lead will also proudly buy Australian. We'll make sure the projects we commission bring benefits to Australian companies and will help small and medium businesses compete for contracts, because we should be using the power of government purchasing to back our own people and our own businesses. These actions will revitalise Australian industry in a way that generates productive, secure and well-paid jobs. One of our greatest untapped resources to build a vibrant and better future is the full and respectful participation of women. Under the Liberals, Australia has fallen to 70th in the world for women's economic participation and opportunity. We've gone from being the 24th most equal country in the world for women and men to 50th. 24th to 50th. Women are underutilised, undervalued and underpaid, and too often they're disrespected in the workplace. Enhancing economic opportunity for women is the right thing to do, but it's also absolutely in our national interest. Labor has already committed to using all the tools in our power to close the gender pay gap. At my campaign launch in Perth, I announced that Labor will make gender pay equity an objective of the Fair Work Act. We will set up expert panels on pay equity in the care and community sector to help improve pay and conditions for women in those sectors. We need to fix the persistent structural barriers that prevent so many women securing decent jobs and careers and financial security over the course of their lives. A Labor government will see economic opportunity for women as a key national project that benefits women and men. Part of that must be investment in social infrastructure to improve productivity and facilitate workforce participation. And that's where childcare comes in and plays such a critical role. And I note ACCI's support for that very much today, consistent with the support that's there from right across the business sector. One of the most effective ways that we can boost participation is by getting rid of the complicated mess of payments that put hurdles in the path of parents wanting to return to work. This has been evident for some time. And it's why Labor's plan to move towards universal provision of affordable childcare was the centrepiece of my first budget reply back in 2020. This remains the largest on-budget commitment of any policy we are taking to this election. We will increase the maximum childcare subsidy and make it cheaper for 96% of families. 96%. The other 4% will get the same. And we'll ask the Productivity Commission to investigate moving to a universal 90% subsidy. This will provide immediate and lasting cost of living relief for families. But importantly, it's not welfare. It is critical economic reform, critical for the modern economy, getting rid of the outdated, bizarre economic distortion that actually punishes mothers in particular for working more than 3 or 4 days a week. It stops workplaces being deprived of the skills and knowledge and experience of those women, providing a boost to workforce participation and turbocharging productivity. Early education, by the way, is also an investment in our children's future. Together with paid parental leave and the implementation of the 55, all of them, all 55, recommendations of the Respect at Work report, Labor will improve productivity through women's workforce participation. Our childcare plan fits within Labor's history of pursuing reforms that are good for the economy and that give people the confidence to pursue their aspirations and fulfil their potential. We will proudly add it to Labor's legacy of reliable, affordable, universal services. Medicare, superannuation, the NBN, the NDIS and universal childcare. Pretty good record for Labor to be proud of. Now, a fundamental chasm in the policy offering that this election is seeing centres around climate change. Again, an economic reform. Only Labor recognises that the challenge of climate change presents a game-changing opportunity for the Australian economy. We know that policies to deal with climate change represent an overdue economic reform. The bushfires and floods have reminded us of the human, environmental and economic costs of this government refusing to act. Now, we listen to the science on the pandemic. We must listen to the science on climate change because it's clear. Young Australians, I'm sure Lyle's kids know, that their future is at stake. They've been let down by the vandalism of Abbott, the disappointments of Turnbull, and the refusal of Morrison to accept any responsibility. It was not just the Prime Minister's failure to hold a hose when the bushfires raged. It wasn't just the Prime Minister's failure to show up when the floodwaters rose. One of the lasting wounds of this Prime Minister's failure to take responsibility is his failure to legislate policies that would tackle the driver of these fires and floods. The driver, of course, is climate change. We know that Australia has always had natural disasters, but the science tells us that they're more frequent and they're more intense, and we need to act as part of the global effort. Now, Labor's Powering Australia plan is a response to the science, but with a solution that is economic. Dealing with the profound challenge of climate change will mean employing every capital resource, human, intellectual, research and development, and investment to produce and grow the technological innovations for a sustainable future. Making climate change action and economic reform ensures that jobs will be front and centre of Labor's plans. The enterprise investment opportunities of climate change action will be the next source of productivity growth for our country. Our National Reconstruction Fund will ensure that finance is available for good investments in new industries, upgrading our energy grid to be fit for purpose and providing investment certainty has been the catch cry of the energy sector and business. Frustrated at the hopeless mess of energy policies offered up by this government, but not landed. 22 different policy announcements, 22 in all. Each one different, each one contradictory. Not a single one delivered. Typical of a government that loves posing for photos but disappears when there's a job to be done. Now, our policy was costed by leading energy economics firm Reputex, the most extensive modelling of a policy by any opposition ever. It will create 604,000 jobs by 2030. 5 out of every 6 of those will be in the regions. $52 billion of private sector investment will be generated. It will cut household power bills in the national energy market by $275 by 2025, providing real cost of living relief. It, of course, will as well reduce energy costs for business. It will reduce emissions by 43% by 2030. Now, what we didn't do was arrive at a target and then work out how to get there. What we did was work out good policy, and that's what came of the analysis. 43% reduction by 2030. It's been welcomed by the BCA, Australian Industry Group, National Farmers Federation, the ACCU, and by our host today, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I thank them for that. Only the election of a Labor government can end the climate wars. That much is clear. And business needs this nonsense to end. And in ending them, we'll bring about a new era of growth, productivity and prosperity. Now, can I say in conclusion that in a recent profile piece for the Sydney Morning Herald, my opponent declared that he didn't want to leave a legacy. Doesn't it show? Doesn't it show? I don't know why you'd do this job if you didn't want to leave a legacy, I've got to say. Because I do. I do, and that's why I'm running for Prime Minister. I want to add universal childcare to the list of universal provision of Medicare and superannuation, of which Labor is proud. I want to lift wages through productivity growth. I want to increase economic opportunity for women in Australia. I want to seize the opportunity for growth and job creation by acting on climate change. Labor's model of inclusive growth will be consistent with our two great declarations. No one left behind, because Labor will always look after the disadvantaged, and no one held back, because Labor is the party of aspiration and opportunity. I said on the day that I became Labor leader, I wanted to be about creating wealth, not just concerned about its distribution, unashamedly working with business to create wealth, but also making sure that the benefits are distributed fairly. Giving everyone a piece of the action is what we want. I did grow up on Pyrmont Bridge Road, just down the road here. And to this day, I'm driven by the memory of my late mum. It'll be 20 years since she passed in just a couple of days after the election. But also the people that I grew up with. And I always, during these times, I often think to myself, okay, what would her response be to different issues? She was pretty grounded. She followed the news and always was very straightforward in her views. She instilled in me the values of hard work, fairness and generosity that still shape my worldview today. Good government made a difference to my life. It made my childhood possible. It helped Mum and I, who was an invalid pensioner, give us a secure roof over our heads. We loved our church, our community, and sitting on the Redfern Oval Hill, sometimes a rough place those days on a Saturday afternoon. But we're surrounded by people just like us. And they just want a fair go in life. It's their voices that motivate me still. Australians don't ask for everything. What they want is just a fair go, and they want their kids to have a better life than they enjoyed. That's what I grew up with. That's what's brought me from that public housing place down the road there to a position of running for Prime Minister. And Labor governments are what made that possible. Labor governments. And the Labor-controlled Sydney City Council, I've got to say as well. Now, the people I grew up with don't use words like reform or productivity. But what they need from our nation's leaders is what only economic reform and increased productivity can deliver. And that's our job. Be rewarded for their hard work. They just want to get ahead, live a good life, set their kids up to fulfil their potential. To make that possible, they need a better government, a government with a better plan for economic reforms that make a positive difference. We are the greatest country on earth, and with a better government and real reform, Australia can have a better future. Thanks very much.
So thank you very much to Anthony Albanese for that very detailed agenda that he's outlined there. Mr Albanese, if you've got a few more moments, we'll invite you to stay for some questions, and I would ask the Chief Executive of Business New South Wales, Dan Hunter, to perhaps lead the questions and moderate this discussion. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Andrew. Anthony, thank you again for joining us here today. I'm going to throw to the floor in a minute. Compliments to you and your team, because you've said that you'll take any question from the floor today. So have a think about it so we don't get that awkward silence in a minute. But I'm going to kick things off. You spoke a lot today about productivity. We've got a handbrake, particularly here in New South Wales, but across the country at the moment on business. And when I talk about business, it's not big corporates and buildings. Business is about people. And that handbrake is about people. It's our labour shortage. Not Labor, the political party, there's plenty of them here, but Labor and skilled labour in particular. And it's an immediate thing, and it's an immediate handbrake on businesses as we spring out of this pandemic. My question for you is there anything short-term we can do to enable our own population to get into the workforce, to help out, to take advantage of those opportunities? And then more, is there anything that we can do to get people into Australia to really start to fill those roles around skilled migration?
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, there's a number of responses to that. One is that this is a problem that has been generated for some period of time. One of the lessons of the pandemic, I think, is that it's shown the strength of our society, but it's shown some of our economic vulnerabilities. So when the borders were shut and the use of temporary migration to fill shortages in skills was made more difficult, then that exposure is there, whether it be engineers for major construction, or whether it be right down to hospitality workers or agricultural workers. So we need to be cognisant of that, and that's something that will be very much on the agenda for the summit that I'll convene with business and others to do. We're up for debates about short-term issues, including migration in terms of filling skill shortages. We're also up, though, for making sure that we put in place those measures to make sure that we're training and skilling up Australians for the long term. Even the nature of the migration program, I think, needs to... Why is it that we have temporary engineers coming in for... if we can get them, we'll keep them. They've been short for a very long period of time. Not just engineers, but we were at a TAFE yesterday with Tanya down in Melbourne. Chefs have been short forever. Business is frustrated by not being able to have access and to have those pathways through as well. So I think our first starting point is always to train Australians and to skill them up. The second is, how do we make sure that migration plays a role, both in terms of permanent migration, the nature of it with skilled migration, but also we'll always need, Australia, temporary migration has always had a role in that. But there are other ways as well, potentially, that we can as well. One area, just for example, is whether we need to have a discussion about whether pensioners, for example, can work additional hours without having an economic impact. Now, for some, they're out there with skills to do it. One of the things that happened during the pandemic is that nurses, including ones I know, the last ever mayor of Ashfield, Lucille McKenna, went back and did some work because the shortages were there. Can we look at those sort of measures as well, have a constructive discussion, because it is a massive handbrake and it's something we're very conscious of.
Yeah, I think from our perspective as well, there's a view that in the past we've been able to rely on Australia attracting that talent in, but now we're competing for that talent on a worldwide stage. And I do agree with you, we've got to grow our own, but also bring some talent in. I'm going to throw to the floor now. Have we got a question? We'll go straight here.
Thanks, Dean. Mr. Albanese, you've just committed yourself, if you win election to a courageous, productivity-based reform agenda in the tradition of Hawke and Keating. Of course, you referenced one of Australia's great reform champions, and Paul Keating, and a great tax reformer as well in the 1980s and 90s. In your first term of office, would an Albanese government commit to a broad-based tax review to look at tax reform? And I know you've got to be careful about talking about tax, but even to a revenue neutral, broad-based root and branch tax review, as Kevin Rudd did in office. Why would you not be up for that?
Because we're up for what we're taking to this election, and that's not part of our agenda. We've put out there our multinational tax changes, being upfront about that. That's the agenda that we're taking to this election. I'm being very clear about my agenda for change at this election, being very clear to say exactly what we will do as a first term. And I've said, Michael, you might have heard me say before, including at the AFL Summit, I think, that I have two dates in mind. One date, I now know what it is, May the 21st, but the second date is 3 years' time, and I want to be able to have got the reforms that we are saying, exactly what we are saying we will do, is what my priorities are, and at the election after this, without getting ahead of ourselves, I want to be able to say, we said we would do that, we've done it. We're offering cheaper childcare. We've set up Jobs and Skills Australia. We've set up the National Reconstruction Fund. Australia's benefiting from new industries as a result of what we are doing. We are seeing growth. We are seeing productivity. we are seeing those social, economic and environmental changes as a priority going forward.
Thanks very much. I think we've got a question down here, do we? There's a hand up in the corner there. If we can just send a microphone over. Thank you. Thanks.
Hi.
You can just maybe say where you're from as well. When
Diane Tate from the Australian Finance Industry Association. There's a lot going on in the world at the moment, and you've just outlined a strong history of yourself and your party being able to handle change. What have you learnt that you would bring into the next few years if you were to win the election?
That you have to shape change, otherwise it'll shape you. And what we're seeing at the moment is a country that's in drift, that's being shaped by internal consequences, that isn't prepared for shocks. And there could be another pandemic, there could be cybersecurity issues. We live in a far more uncertain security environment in our region where we have strategic competition between the great powers. So what we need to do is to make sure that we have more resilience. And that's what everything that we have done is aimed at two things. One is the big commitments, childcare in terms of our expenditures, investment in education and training and skills, investment in the national broadband network. They are all things that will boost productivity, all things that will produce a return. It's not just an out, it's an in as well. So prioritising that with the general theme as well of more resilience, being able to stand on our own 2 feet. We can't just continue to be at the end of the supply chains. You know, this government speaks about security. 2 of our 4 refineries have shut this term. When they were asked about fuel security, it's at the Gulf of Mexico. It's nowhere near us. This government hasn't been preparing Australia for potential shocks or challenges which are there. The lesson of the pandemic is that we need to be more self-reliant. We need to stand on our own 2 feet. We need to be stronger. We need to invest in our people and support our businesses to be stronger in the future.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the question. I'm going to swing to this side of the room now. We've got one over the back here. Thank you very much.
Hi, it's Raj Khatri from Campbell Page Limited. My question's in relation to disability employment. Obviously, with talk of unemployment at 4% and heading lower, there's not a lot of focus on the challenges that disabled people face. So my first question is, what would a Labor government do differently to the current government in terms of assisting those disadvantaged people? And the second part of the question is, disability employment is currently a separate niche area, and there's talk about rolling it into what is now Workforce Australia, which was Job Active, or into the NDIS, and if you can provide some highlight on that.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. Look, the whole idea and concept behind the NDIS, when we foreshadowed it began at the 2020 summit, really is where it took off, that debate, and we worked on the structure, being sure that when we invest in our people to fulfil their capacity to contribute, it actually produces not just a good outcome for individuals by making sure they can fully participate in society, it's good for the economy as well. And a major part of that is, of course, in employment services and getting people into work so they can fulfil their potential. Part of our concern with the way that the NDIS is currently being functioning is the cuts to people's programs that have been done at arm's length that don't seem to make any rational sense. You also have an extraordinary amount of money being used on court cases and challenges to people in terms of their NDIS plans. And you also have a circumstance whereby in some of the regions it's more, we need to make sure that everyone can participate fully through that program as well. I've spoken to a number of employment service providers, including last night in Melbourne. And we need to make sure that it's all fit for purpose. That's one of the things that we'll work through in the way that we review the operation of the scheme. One of the things we'll also do is to make sure that in the cuts that we've said that we will make, some $3 billion to various outsourcing, labour hire, etc. that's happened, that's crept in. Some of that funding will go back into rebuilding the public service, including for extra staff at the NDIS and extra staff in terms of across the public sector to make sure that service provision puts humans back into human services, essentially. The whole robo-debt debacle is about people being treated as if they're not human beings, and outcomes which are distorted as a result of that. And our overall approach to all of these areas, whether it's employment services, whether it be areas of social services as well, will be to make sure that people can actually engage, because unless you do that, you won't get good outcomes.
Thanks very much. Got time for one more quick question, so I'm going to hand the mic straight over here. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks very much, Mr Albanese. Steve Schofield from the Downer Group. I'd love to hear more about the plans for local manufacturing. We're a large Australian and Kiwi employer, over 43,000 people, but local manufacturing post-pandemic highlights, I think, the opportunity and the scope and the potential for growth, but also investment in local jobs, apprenticeships, traineeships. So perhaps just expand on that for a few moments.
It does indeed, and I've been a regular visitor to Maryborough and to various Downer sites. Look, I think if there is a single example of the fallacy that offshoring makes economic sense, it's in the area of rail and light rail manufacturing. There isn't a train carriage that's been built overseas that I'm aware of that's been fit for purpose. In Maryborough, they're there changing all the carriages that were built offshore because you don't have the right product coming here. We have built trains in places like the Hunter Valley and Maryborough and Ballarat and in regional Australia for 100 years and more. And it is absurd that we think that somehow it's cheaper. It ends up being more expensive because it doesn't fit. The light rail here that runs from here, just outside where we are now, to pretty close to where I live at Dulwich Hill, shut down because they need to go back to Spain to get a part. It's not more efficient if it doesn't run. It's less efficient. It's cost jobs, but also it's cost the multiplier impact as well. It's like the car industry. If you have high-value manufacturing, it's not just the jobs that are immediate there. It's the suppliers. It's the skills that are learnt. And one of the things that we've said, for example, in rail, is that we will have, at the moment, Labor governments in Queensland, WA and Victoria are all into building things here. We'll have a national rail manufacturing plan because supported by the industry peak, the Australasian Rail Association, supported by individual businesses, supported by the RTBU and the AMWU, the industry unions, because if you actually have some national coordination, that's where microeconomic reform and productivity kicks in, because you can actually do things in a staggered way that produces a better outcome. And if there's any Commonwealth Government involvement as well, we'll insist 10% at least of any project that's a significant project has to have at least 10% apprentices and trainees on site. And we know that works as well. It helps build up that skills base. So this is common sense. And our National Reconstruction Fund will be about assisting existing businesses, some $15 billion will be available, but also new businesses as well in the new economy. The sort of businesses that we saw just this morning, whereby Australian-made electric vehicles, Australian-made electric motorbikes, other new products. We're producing the fastest EV charging stations in the world, Tritium in southeast Queensland, exporting them to North America and Europe. These are the opportunities that we have. And with our National Reconstruction Fund, one of the things we announced as part of the policy last Sunday was that for our natural resources that we have, sure, we'll continue to export them and get that income, but we can do more than that too. When you produce nickel, when you produce copper, when you produce lithium, you can manufacture and value add here, and really benefit from that, not just for domestic purposes, but to export for the world. If we seize the opportunities before us at this moment, we can have a growing economy, a more productive economy, a more inclusive economy. But if we just continue to drift, another 3 years of every other country, all of our competitors in this globalised world going forward, while we're just standing still, if you're standing still, the world goes past you. And that's what's going on at the moment, and that's why we need a change of government.
Thanks very much. I think we'll wrap up this now. Look, I did just want to say thank you, Anthony, and all the very best for a couple of weeks' time. And should you form government, we look forward to joining you at a Labor Summit. And I would like to thank all our members of Business New South Wales and ACCI for joining us today. So thanks very much.
Thank you.